The morning light over Savannah had that soft gold hue I'd always loved, gentle, but full of promise. From my window, the moss hanging from the oak branches swayed like faded lace. I'm Evelyn Moreland, 71 years old, retired art teacher, widow for nearly 2 decades. I've always believed that beauty lives in the quiet details, how a ribbon catches light, how the air holds still before something changes. That morning, I was fastening the satin ribbon of my dress, the same shade of pale blue I wore when my son graduated college. Rowan was getting married today, my only child, the boy who once held my hand at every thunderstorm, now standing at the altar with a woman who looked like she'd been sculpted from grace and confidence. Soraya Vale, her name, carried that air of practiced charm. Everyone said she was perfect for him, elegant, well-spoken. From a family that hosted fundraisers and wore good intentions like jewelry, I tried to believe it. I tried hard, but something in her smile always felt just a beat too timed. Like a photograph staged too precisely. The suite smelled faintly of lavender spray and starch. My hands shook a little as I pinned the silver brooch Rowan gave me on my last birthday. He'd saved up for it from his teaching job, saying, "You deserve something that lasts." Mom, that's Rowan always giving. Always believing love could outlast disappointment. A soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened the door, he stood there in his charcoal vest, hair slightly uncombed as if he'd run his hands through it too many times. His eyes, kind, uncertain, met mine. "You look beautiful," he said. I laughed. "That's supposed to be my line." He smiled the same shy smile he had when he was 5, asking if monsters were real. He hugged me tightly before heading off to the groom's suite. The scent of his cologne lingered long after he left, a mix of cedar and youth, and something that already belonged to memory. I looked at myself in the mirror once more, adjusted the ribbon that wouldn't stay flat, and told myself to breathe. Outside, the church bells began to ring. Somewhere down the hall, laughter echoed high, bright, careless. I didn't know it then, but that laughter would follow me into the hours that changed everything. The corridor smelled faintly of orchids and floor polish, the kind of sterile sweetness that belongs only to hotels. The florist had just arrived, and one of the attendants mentioned that the bridal bouquet had been left upstairs in the suite. I decided to fetch it myself. Small errands calm me. Something about having a purpose keeps the nerves from spreading too wide. As I walked, the hush of the air conditioning carried the distant hum of music from the reception hall below, the sound of preparation plates being set. Champagne flutes clinking filled the silence like a heartbeat. Everything looked perfect, and yet I felt a restlessness I couldn't name. The door to Soraya's suite stood slightly ajar. I meant to knock. Truly. I did, but the sound that came from inside stopped me before my knuckles reached the wood. Laughter, sharp, light. The kind that carries cruelty hidden beneath charm. I froze, one hand still hovering near the doorframe. Just thinking about sleeping with that fat pig makes me sick. The words slid out of Soraya's mouth like poison dressed in perfume. The air left my lungs. For a moment, I thought I had misheard, but the chorus of laughter that followed confirmed every syllable. My heart clenched so tight it felt as if my body had turned to glass. Someone inside one of the bridesmaids, I think, giggled. "Soraya," she whispered. Half scandalized, half delighted, Soraya's voice came again. Lower, mocking. "Oh, please." He's sweet, sure, but every time he hugs me, I feel like I'm being smothered by a mattress. Once the rings are on, I'll have his name and his paycheck. After that, I'll manage. A wave of nausea rose up my throat. My hands trembled so violently that I had to press them against the wall. The cool wallpaper grounded me, barely. I wanted to burst through that door, to defend him, to defend the boy who still brought me coffee every Sunday morning when I forgot to set the kettle. But I couldn't move. I stood there, hearing every cruel word fall like shards of glass. Then came the worst part, the laughter again, the kind that isn't nervous but satisfied, confident in its meanness. I thought of Rowan downstairs, probably rehearsing his vows one last time, smiling, believing he was loved. Something inside me broke loose. A small sound escaped my throat. Half gasp, half whisper. The laughter stopped instantly. I didn't breathe. A chair scraped the floor. Footsteps approached. The door swung wider, and Soraya stood in the opening, still holding a champagne flute. Her eyes met mine, and for the briefest moment, her face drained of color. Then, like a curtain falling, she smiled. "Mrs. Moreland," she said softly, as if nothing had happened. "You startled me." Her tone was smooth, but I saw her hand tighten around the stem of the glass. I forced my lips into something resembling a smile and nodded once, not trusting myself to speak. The bouquet sat on the table behind her, a halo of white roses gleaming under the vanity lights. I stepped forward, picked it up, and turned away without a word. As I walked down the hall, my vision blurred. The laughter was gone, but its echo clung to the walls thin, invisible, and impossible to silence. I don't remember how I made it back to my room. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the bouquet twice before setting it down on the dresser. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the quiet felt deafening. My chest ached as if my heart had been running a marathon it didn't train for. I tried to breathe, slow and even, but every inhale came out ragged. The sound of Soraya's laughter wouldn't leave me. It echoed between my ribs, mocking me. The clock on the nightstand read 10:41. In less than 3 hours, my son would stand at that altar, waiting for a woman who saw him as a transaction. I pressed my palms against the dresser to steady myself. Tell him. The thought rose like a command, fierce and clear. Then came its shadow. Don't ruin this day. Don't be the mother who meddles again. That word again hung heavy. Years ago, when Rowan was 23, I had stepped in too soon. He was dating a woman named Colette, a quiet nurse who seemed kind, until I found a series of messages that made me uneasy. I confronted her directly instead of talking to him first. She left the next day, and he didn't speak to me for months. "You can't protect me from heartbreak, Mom," he'd said back then. "You only make it worse." The memory burned through me now, leaving guilt in its wake. Maybe I saw danger everywhere because I was too afraid of losing him again. Maybe I mistook control for love, but this was different. No mother should stand by while her child is mocked by the person meant to vow loyalty. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching my phone. The floral wallpaper blurred through my tears. I scrolled through my contacts until I saw a name that steadied me. Jonas Quill. Jonas had been my husband's friend long before he became our lawyer, in another life. Before widowhood made me quiet and careful. We'd shared coffee over legal documents and half-remembered jokes. If anyone could talk sense into me, it was him. He picked up on the second ring. "Evelyn, you sound out of breath. Everything all right?" "No," I whispered. My voice cracked. "Jonas, I heard something awful." I told him everything, the laughter, the words, the way Soraya's face went pale when she saw me. I spoke too fast, barely pausing to breathe. He listened in silence, as he always did. The kind of listening that felt like a hand on your shoulder. When I finished, there was a pause on the line. "Do you have proof?" he asked gently. "No, just my word. And if you tell Rowan, he might think I'm trying to sabotage his happiness." Jonas sighed softly. "Then we protect him quietly. I'll review the trust clause we drafted last year. If she's what you say she is, we'll make sure she never gets near what's his." His calm steadied me. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there for a long while, staring at the bouquet. The roses were flawless, too flawless, like the smile of the woman who would carry them down the aisle. Outside, the church bells began to toll noon. Each note sounded less like celebration and more like warning. I closed my eyes and let the sound fill the room, trying to decide whether the truth would save my son or shatter him. Jonas called back before noon. I was standing by the window, watching the clouds gather over the river. When the phone buzzed against the sill, his voice, always steady, cut through the noise in my head. "I've looked through the documents," he said without preamble. "Your late husband's trust still lists Rowan as sole heir, but there's a clause pending review, the one about spousal access." I closed my eyes. I remembered signing those papers years ago, believing I'd never need to revisit them. "That clause," I murmured. "If Rowan marries, she'd automatically share control." "Correct. Unless you update it before the marriage is finalized." The words settled like stones in my chest. I pictured Saria's laughter, her voice dripping with mockery. And my hands began to tremble again, but not from fear this time. "Can you change it today?" Jonas hesitated. "It's your son's wedding day, Eveline. Are you sure you want to do this now, Jonas?" I said quietly. "I may not be sure about much anymore, but I'm sure about this." There was a pause, long, careful. Then he sighed. "All right, I'll draft a revision and send it for your signature. But once it's filed, there's no going back without legal noise. Better to be wrong and safe." I said, "Then write too late." He didn't argue after that. I hung up and sat down at the small writing desk near the bed. The bouquet lay beside me, its petals already wilting at the edges. I opened my laptop, signed into the secure file portal Jonas had sent, and reviewed the document line by line. The new clause would lock any marital partner out of the family's financial assets without joint authorization. Every transaction would require my co-signature until Rowan chose to amend it after a defined probationary term. It was cold, clinical, exactly what I needed. My hand shook only once when I typed my name in the digital field. When I pressed submit, a faint sound of paper rustling came from the printer downstairs, a quiet proof of something irreversible. A notification pinged on my phone just as I stood to stretch. Rowan had posted a photo him in his vest, tie crooked, sunlight spilling over his shoulder. The caption read, "Best day of my life." Can't believe I get to marry my best friend. I stared at the words for a long time. He looked radiant, open, like a man finally stepping into everything he'd dreamed of. And I, his mother, had just taken a scalpel to that dream, cutting away what might one day have been trust. Outside, thunder rolled distantly over the Savannah River, low and measured. I watched the first drop of rain slide down the window pane, tracing a path so clean it almost looked merciful. Then I reached for my shawl, folded it carefully, and whispered to no one in particular, "You'll forgive me someday." The rehearsal luncheon was set in the sunroom of the Harrington Hotel, where glass walls framed the Savannah River like a painting. The space shimmered with light crystal goblets, white linens, a pianist in the corner coaxing out slow, romantic tunes. Everything looked perfect, as if someone had scripted the day and polished every line of dialogue. Soraya moved through the tables like she'd been born to command attention. Her laughter carried softly, polite, yet precise. Never too loud. She leaned toward guests with that calculated warmth that made people feel chosen. I watched from a distance as she placed a hand lightly on Rowan's arm, whispering something that made him blush. To everyone else, it looked like affection. To me, it looked like performance. When the waiter offered dessert lemon tarts and pecan pralines, Soraya smiled sweetly. "No, thank you," she said. "Rowan's trying to be careful with sugar." We don't want him getting sleepy during the vows." The table erupted in laughter, including Rowan's best man. My son chuckled along, but I saw the flicker of embarrassment before he masked it. Soraya's hand stayed on his shoulder as if to soften the sting she'd caused. Her tone was playful, but the message landed like a pinprick. "You're not enough as you are." I excused myself before my temper could show. From the doorway, I caught sight of Dorian Vale, Soraya's father, standing near the bar with a man I didn't recognize. His smile looked brittle, the kind of expression someone wears when pretending things are fine. Their voices carried in fragments delays. Liquidity. Another month. Maybe 2. When Dorian noticed me, he straightened his tie and walked over, wearing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Eveline," he greeted, extending his hand. "You've raised a fine young man." We couldn't be happier to have him joining the family. I shook his hand lightly. "You must be proud of Soraya," he chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Proud, yes, but relieved, too. She's found someone steady, someone who won't run at the first sign of trouble." His eyes drifted toward the river for a moment before returning to me. "A good man can anchor a family." Anchor. The word lingered. As he returned to his conversation, I felt a cold understanding settle in. The elegance, the effortless poise, everything about this union felt transactional. Soraya wasn't marrying my son for love. She was securing herself to safety, to reputation, to stability. Back at the table, champagne flutes were being filled. Soraya stood to give a toast. "To love," she said, her voice luminous, "and to building a life where we lift each other higher." Glasses clinked. I raised mine, but I didn't drink. My eyes stayed on her, searching for sincerity, and finding instead a thin sheen of performance that shimmered like glass, beautiful, but fragile. Rowan slipped his arm around her waist, his expression open and proud. For a brief second, she met my gaze across the table. Her smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes hardened, like she knew I'd seen the truth she meant to hide. The pianist began a new song, delicate and slow. Around us, laughter resumed. Chairs shifted. Conversation floated through the air like ribbons. Yet beneath it all, I could hear a faint hum of strain, the kind that builds before glass cracks. I turned my glass slightly, watching how the sunlight fractured through it bright, refracted, almost blinding. A perfect illusion, I thought, and somewhere deep inside, I understood that perfection was the most fragile thing in the world. The next morning arrived pale and heavy with mist. Savannah's streets were still damp from the night rain, the city not yet awake. I waited in the hotel cafe, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. My hands wrapped around it for warmth more than comfort. Jonas walked in precisely at 7, raincoat folded over his arm, his silver hair glinting faintly beneath the skylight. He looked the same as always, composed, deliberate. A man who measured his words the way a surgeon measures incisions. He placed a brown envelope on the table between us. "I've redrafted the trust language," he said quietly. "You'll want to read every word, but I can explain the essentials first." I nodded, though my throat felt dry. "The new clause gives you co-signing authority," he continued. "That means any major financial decision selling assets, altering ownership, taking loans will require your approval, even after the marriage." He paused, studying my face. "It's airtight and discreet. Rowan won't notice unless someone tries to move money." I brushed a thumb over the envelope's edge. My reflection shimmered in the polished table, a face I barely recognized, tired, alert. A woman who had stopped waiting for good faith to protect what mattered. "Jonas," I said softly, "I hate that it's come to this." He leaned back, fingers folded. Sometimes love and caution share the same house. You're not punishing anyone. You're safeguarding the years you built. The words steadied me, though they didn't make it easier. I slipped the documents out. Page after page of small, precise print. The ink smelled faintly metallic. Each line was a quiet boundary. Each signature space a reminder of everything I could lose if I hesitated. When I reached the final page, my hand trembled. I gripped the pen until my knuckles whitened and signed Evelyn Grace Moreland. Jonas gathered the papers, sealing them into a courier envelope. "I'll file this before noon," he said. "Once it's registered, no one but you can alter it." I exhaled slowly, a sound halfway between relief and sorrow. "Thank you," I murmured, "for not asking me to wait." He hesitated, his expression softening. "Evelyn, I've known you since before Rowan could walk. You've always chosen the harder road when it meant doing right by him. This is no different." After he left, I sat for a long while staring out the window. The morning fog had lifted, revealing the courtyard beyond the glass wall. Across the lawn, I could see the bridesmaids gathered near the archway, their laughter floating upward like bubbles. Soraya stood at the center of them, hair pinned in soft waves, her dress a simple ivory robe tied at the waist. She was holding cue cards, her vows. I realized. The makeup artist dabbed powder on her cheek as she practiced lines aloud. "I promise to cherish your kindness," she said, smiling, "and your patience." The women giggled when she added, "Especially when you're late, as always." Her tone was flawless light, loving, playful. No trace of the venom I'd heard in that hallway yesterday. She was an actress performing her best role, and the audience adored her. I turned away before anyone could see me watching. My coffee had gone cold again. I poured what was left into the sink and rinsed the cup, the simple action grounding me. Then I straightened my shoulders, picked up my shawl, and walked out into the morning. The papers were filed. The protection was done. Somewhere in the same building, Soraya was rehearsing vows she'd never mean, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to calm and uneasy calm, but mine nonetheless. By late afternoon, the air in the hotel had grown heavy with perfume and nerves. The bridal party floated through the halls like a procession of silk and glitter. From my seat in the lounge, I could hear snippets of conversation carried by the hum of preparation voices too bright, laughter too rehearsed. I had told myself I wouldn't linger near Soraya again. But fate, or perhaps some cruel instinct, drew me down the corridor once more. I was passing the open doors of the parlor when her voice reached me. "Once the papers are signed," she said, laughter rippling between words, "I'll have everything." Her tone was low and amused, as if sharing a secret too delicious to keep. A bridesmaid gasped softly, then joined in the laughter that followed. I stopped mid-step, hidden just beyond the doorway. My pulse steady this time, not shock anymore, but certainty. She wasn't careless. She was confident. The cruelty wasn't an accident, it was a plan. I walked away quietly, the echo of their laughter trailing me down the hall. My hand brushed against the railing as I descended the stairs, each touch grounding me. The anger that might once have shaken me now felt cold, precise. Jonas was waiting by the hotel entrance, reviewing documents on his tablet. He looked up as I approached. "She said it again." I told him. My voice was calm, too calm. "Once the papers are signed, she'll have everything." He exhaled, setting the device aside. "Then it's a good thing the papers she's counting on don't exist." I almost smiled. "The ceremony will go on," I said, "but she'll never own the Moreland name." "Not truly," Jonas nodded. "I'll make sure the legal confirmations reach the registrar before the vows. That way, No misunderstanding can undo what we've done. After he left, I began making small adjustments. I found the event coordinator, a young woman named Paige with kind eyes, and asked her to delay the florist by 30 minutes, claiming we wanted fresh petals placed closer to the ceremony time. Then I asked that the final signing of the wedding license be postponed until after the officiant's cue. Under the pretense of photographic flow, each lie was small, delicate, and necessary. When I returned to my suite, the hallway outside was full of voices. Soraya's laughter rang out again, drifting above them all, that same silken tone that fooled everyone. Through the half-open door, I caught a glimpse of her standing before the mirror while her mother adjusted her veil. She looked radiant, flawless, like a woman who had already won. I watched for a moment, then closed my door quietly behind me. The room smelled of roses and rain. I sat by the window and looked out at the city. The sun was sinking behind the old buildings, turning the glass windows gold. In that reflection, Savannah looked peaceful, timeless, untroubled. But beneath the calm, something inevitable was moving closer, like thunder crawling behind the horizon. By 3 o'clock, the courtyard glowed under a soft golden haze. Guests were beginning to arrive, laughter echoing from the marble foyer as the string quartet tuned their instruments. Everything was in motion except the ceremony itself. The venue manager, a courteous woman named Clara, approached me near the archway. Her hands were clasped politely, but her tone carried a trace of concern. "Mrs. Moreland, we'll need all the signatures on the marital and financial verification papers before we begin. It's standard procedure for events held under contractual sponsorship." I nodded as if I'd expected it all along. "Of course," I said, glancing toward the bridal suite. "Let's make sure everyone's present." Within minutes, we were gathered in one of the smaller reception rooms. The officiant, the coordinator, Clara with her folder of documents, Rowan looking nervous, and Soraya seated beside him, her gown gathered in her lap like a pool of light. Clara placed the final stack of papers on the table. "These are the updated documents, including the financial verification clause recently notarized by your counsel." "Mrs. Moreland," she said smoothly. "Just routine." Soraya's smile faltered. "Updated," she repeated. Rowan looked between us, confusion shadowing his expression. "What's this about?" "Just a revision," I said quietly, keeping my tone even. "Legal housekeeping. It ensures protection on both sides." Soraya's fingers tightened around the pen Clara handed her. Her manicured nails clicked softly against the paper. She read the first paragraph, and color began to rise in her cheeks. "This wasn't in the draft I signed last week," she said. "This part requires joint authorization by Evelyn Moreland for any future asset management." "What does that even mean? It's standard." Jonas's voice came from the doorway. He had entered without announcement, his calm presence filling the room. "Every family trust includes oversight from the founder until the estate transitions. It's purely administrative." Her eyes flashed. "Administrative." Her voice lifted slightly, sharp enough to draw glances from the coordinator and the officiant. "No one told me I'd be marrying into a dictatorship." "Rhea," Rowan murmured, reaching for her hand, but she pulled it away. "This is ridiculous," she said, standing so suddenly that her chair scraped against the floor. "I'm not signing something I didn't approve." "Who does that?" The silence that followed was painful, thick and unyielding. Clara shifted awkwardly, pretending to read through her clipboard. Rowan's face had gone pale. I saw him searching for something to say that wouldn't ignite another spark. "Maybe we can revisit this after the ceremony," he said softly. "It's just paperwork." Soraya gave a tight, brittle laugh. "Paperwork, no. Rowan. It's control disguised as legality." Her gaze darted toward me, cold and knowing. She doesn't trust me. I met her eyes without flinching. Trust is earned, I said simply. The silence stretched again until finally, Soraya snapped the folder shut and tossed the pen onto the table. Fine, she muttered. I need to fix my makeup before we continue this farce. She swept out of the room, heels striking the floor like punctuation marks. Jonas gathered the papers without comment. Rowan followed her with uncertain steps, apology written all over his face. I stayed behind, alone with the scent of wilted roses and the echo of her laughter from the corridor once polished, now frayed at the edges. Outside, the first chords of the quartet began to play. But something in the music sounded off-tempo, like the day itself had forgotten how to keep rhythm. The women's powder room was a cool hush of marble and perfume, a small oasis tucked between the ballroom and the bridal suite. I found Soraya there, standing before the long mirror, retouching her lipstick with hands that trembled slightly, despite the practiced smile on her face. Her reflection met mine as the door closed behind me. You didn't have to make a scene, I said quietly. My voice sounded too calm, even to me. She capped the lipstick with a sharp click and turned, eyes bright with fury hidden beneath gloss. I didn't make a scene. You ambushed me in front of everyone. That paperwork wasn't an ambush. It was protection. For Rowan. For all of us. Soraya's jaw tightened. You think I don't see what this is? You've been waiting for an excuse to make me look like some gold digger who doesn't belong here. Her tone rose just enough for the echo to bounce off the tile. I took a slow step closer. If you didn't say the things I heard, you have nothing to fear from a few signatures. Something flickered across her face, panic or rage too sharp to hide. Then her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She leaned in, her whisper so close I could feel it on my cheek. You'll regret meddling, old woman. She hissed. Once I have that ring, there's nothing you can do to stop me. The door opened before I could reply. Rowan stepped inside, confusion clouding his face. Mom, Soraya. His gaze darted between us. What's going on? Soraya turned instantly, voice breaking into the soft tremor of practiced vulnerability. She came in here to tell me I don't deserve you. Tears welled perfectly at the corners of her eyes. I'm trying, Rowan, but she hates me. She's hated me from the beginning. I stared at her, words caught in my throat. The transformation was astonishing, a perfect switch. From venom to fragility in the span of a breath. Rowan's eyes softened, then shifted toward me, searching for balance between two stories that didn't match. That's not what happened, I said, forcing my voice steady. We were talking about the paperwork, nothing more. Soraya covered her face, shoulders shaking. She thinks I'm after your money, she murmured between sobs. I just wanted today to be happy. Rowan moved toward her instinctively, his hand hovering above her shoulder. His expression was full of doubt and apology, and the ache of wanting to believe in love over logic. Mom, he said quietly, maybe we should just let today be about the wedding. We can talk later. I watched him fold her into an embrace, her tears smudging his collar, her eyes meeting mine over his shoulder, cold, triumphant, glinting beneath the mask. For the first time since morning, I felt something colder than anger settle in my chest. Not fear, not defeat, but the hollow certainty that my son was walking toward a trap and that he'd hold my hand all the way there, convinced it was love guiding him. The ceremony began beneath a canopy of white roses and glass lanterns. The air in the courtyard shimmered with the heavy scent of magnolia and rain, as if Savannah itself were holding its breath. Guests settled into their seats, fans fluttering softly against the growing warmth. From the first note of the string quartet, the moment felt too fragile to touch. Soraya emerged from the archway on her father's arm, a portrait of grace. The gown flowed like poured silk, the veil tracing the ground in a whisper. Her smile was perfect steady, luminous, practiced. But her eyes darted briefly toward me before she turned back to the aisle, and I saw the flicker beneath the polish, a thin tremor of nerves, or guilt disguised as poise. Rowan stood beneath the floral arch, hands clasped too tightly, the collar of his suit pressed against his throat, his breathing shallow. From where I sat, I could see him trying to steady himself, jaw tense, eyes glassy with unspoken confusion. The officiant, a gentle man with a sand-colored beard, began the introduction, voice warm and practiced, words about union, commitment, and love filled the air like incense heavy. Sweet, almost suffocating. When it came time for the vows, Rowan lifted his gaze. The hush that fell over the courtyard was absolute. The music had faded. Even the cicadas seemed to still. Soraya turned toward him, her expression radiant. Soraya Vale, she began, her tone smooth as porcelain. Take you, Rowan Moreland, to be my... She faltered for half a second before smiling again. To be my partner, my equal, and my forever. Applause rippled faintly through the guests. Then the officiant nodded toward Rowan. He looked down at the paper in his hand, then back up. I, Rowan Moreland. His voice caught. He cleared his throat. Tried again. Rowan Moreland, take you. The pause stretched. His lips parted, but no sound came. Soraya's smile tightened, her hand reaching for his. He flinched slightly, not away, but not toward her either. A murmur stirred through the rows of guests. Someone coughed. The officiant leaned forward gently. Take your time, he said softly. Rowan's hand trembled. I can't, he whispered. It was so quiet that, for a heartbeat, no one seemed to understand. Then the words settled into the air like broken glass. I can't. Gasps broke out. The officiant froze. Soraya blinked as though she'd been struck. Her hand still hung in the space between them. What do you mean? You can't, she whispered. The edges of her voice fraying. He shook his head, voice low but steady now. I'm sorry. I thought I could. I can't. The courtyard filled with confusion, chairs scraping, whispers rising like wind through reeds. Soraya turned toward the guests, her composure slipping one layer at a time. He's just nervous, she said too loudly, forcing a laugh. He gets anxious, that's all. But Rowan didn't move. His shoulders sagged, the weight of the moment pressing him into stillness. I rose quietly from my seat. My body moved before my mind caught up. As the crowd's whispers swelled, I walked down the aisle, every step echoing against the marble tiles. I reached him, placed a gentle hand on his arm. His eyes met mine, lost, raw, frightened, but alive in a way I hadn't seen in months. It's all right, I whispered. The officiant stepped back. Soraya's face crumpled, not in heartbreak, but in fury, barely hidden behind tears. You can't walk away from me, she said under her breath, trembling, but Rowan did, slowly, quietly, with me beside him. The guests parted like a tide, confusion and murmurs filling the space we left behind. As we reached the courtyard's edge, the quartet faltered into silence. The music died mid-note, and the sound that remained was the faint rattle of the wind through the roses, soft, final, and strangely merciful. The morning after the wedding, that wasn't. Savannah felt colder than it should have. Rain had swept through overnight, leaving the streets slick and silver under a bruised sky. From my kitchen window, I watched the clouds drift over the river, slow and heavy, like a procession for something that had quietly died. By noon, The phone had already rung 12 times. Reporters, relatives, distant friends, all wanting the same thing, the story. The polite ones asked what happened. The others accused. Such a humiliation. One message read, "Couldn't you let him be happy online?" Photos from the ceremony had already spread Soraya in her gown, eyes shining with unshed fury, Rowan standing pale beside her, his tie slightly undone. The captions were cruel runaway groom, cold feet, overbearing mother ruins wedding. The story had rewritten itself before the truth ever had a chance to speak. Rowan hadn't come home that night. When he finally returned the next morning, he went straight to his old room and closed the door without a word. I heard him moving inside, pacing, drawers opening, then silence. For 2 days, he didn't speak. Meals went untouched. The only sound that came from his room was the occasional thud of footsteps, restless and uneven. I tried once to knock, but the words dried in my throat. What could I say? "I did it for you." I heard what she said. None of it would erase the humiliation he'd felt in front of everyone he loved. The house seemed smaller with his silence inside it. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of when he was a boy, how he'd hide in his room after a fight at school, how I'd slip a plate of cookies outside his door and pretend not to notice when they vanished an hour later. But now there were no cookies. No pretending. Only the sound of rain ticking against the glass and the hollow ache of not knowing whether I'd saved him or destroyed something more delicate. By the second evening, I found myself at the dining table, surrounded by the remains of papers Jonas had left, the trust revisions, the notarized pages. My own signature still fresh. I had protected everything, just as I promised. Yet I'd never felt so defenseless. Jonas called that night to check in. His voice was low, careful. "You did what you had to, Eveline. Give him time." I wanted to believe him, but time, I knew, was a cruel thing. It healed slowly, unevenly, and only if both hearts were willing. Later, I passed Rowan's door again. Light seeped through the gap beneath it. I heard the faint sound of his voice, soft, broken, reading something aloud. When I leaned closer, I realized it was one of the vows he'd written, but never spoken. He paused midway, the silence sharp enough to cut through the wood. Then I heard him whisper, almost to himself. She was right. Wasn't she? I stood there for a long time, my hand against the door, unable to tell whether the tears on my face were from relief that he finally spoke, or the pain of knowing I might have become the villain in the story I meant to save. On the third evening, when the air still carried the smell of wet earth and unspoken words, a knock came at the front door. It was soft at first, almost uncertain. I hesitated before answering, expecting another neighbor with polite pity wrapped in gossip. But when I opened the door, a young woman stood there, soaked from the drizzle, clutching a small leather bag to her chest. Her hair was tied back in a hurried knot, mascara smudged from the rain. She looked as if she'd been arguing with herself all the way here. "Mrs. Moreland?" she asked, voice trembling. "Yes, She took a breath. "My name's Kendra. I was part of the bridal prep team for Saria Vale. Hair and makeup, that morning." Her eyes darted over my shoulder, as though afraid Rowan might appear. I stepped aside and let her in. She stood in the living room, dripping faintly onto the hardwood, her hands wringing the strap of her bag. "I've been trying to decide if I should come. I know what people are saying about you, that you ruined the wedding. But I heard something that morning, something you should know." I gestured for her to sit, my pulse quickening. "Go on." Kendra set the bag on her lap and fumbled for her phone. Soraya didn't realize I was still in the room. She was talking to one of her bridesmaids while they were fixing her lashes. I usually keep my phone on record during events notes for timing. For future clients, I didn't mean to eavesdrop. but I couldn't stop thinking about it after what happened. She scrolled for a moment, then pressed play. Soraya's voice filled the room smooth, confident, dripping with disdain. Once I get his business, I'll be done pretending. The man can't even see what's right in front of him. A few tears, a few compliments, and I'll have everything under my name before Christmas. Laughter followed familiar voices, light and cruel. Then the clip ended. The silence that followed felt unreal, as if the room itself was holding its breath. I stared at the phone. The faint glow on the screen, reflecting off the tears I hadn't realized had started falling. Kendra's voice shook. I know it's not much, but I wanted you to have it. I kept thinking, maybe she'd destroy you if I didn't say something. I'm sorry for waiting this long. I nodded, unable to speak. My throat burned with 1,000 swallowed protests. All the times I'd been told to let it go, to stop imagining monsters in polite smiles. Would you send that to me? I managed at last. She nodded quickly. Of course. I even had a friend at the salon check the file metadata timestamp. Location. It's from the hotel suite. The morning of the wedding. It's real. She transferred the file and lingered only long enough to say, you weren't wrong, Mrs. Moreland. You were just the only one brave enough to act like it. Then she left, pulling her hood up against the rain. I sat there long after the door clicked shut. The sound of Soraya's voice still coiling through the room like smoke. It wasn't victory, I felt it was exhaustion. Sharp and clean, like a wound finally cauterized. Later, I forwarded the recording to Jonas. Within the hour, he replied, authentic, verified, you're cleared. Eveline, I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I found myself standing at Rowan's door again, the phone heavy in my hand. Behind that door was the boy who used to trust my word without proof. Now, I had all the proof in the world, and somehow, it only made the silence heavier. I didn't knock. Not yet. I just leaned my forehead against the wood and whispered, I told you the truth. My love, I just wish it hadn't needed to hurt this much. Rowan came to me just after dusk. The sky was dimming to that quiet violet savanna wears before night, and the cicadas were just beginning their trembling chorus. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd waited through 2 sleepless nights. The phone still beside me. He didn't knock. He just stood in the doorway, pale, eyes hollowed from days of silence. You said you had proof, he said. His voice was low, brittle. I nodded, unlocking the phone without a word, and slid it across the table. The audio file glowed faintly on the screen. It's from the morning of the wedding, I said. The stylist recorded it by accident. He hesitated, then pressed play. Soraya's voice filled the room again, cold and effortless. Once I get his business, I'll be done pretending. The man can't even see what's right in front of him. There was laughter, soft and cruel. I watched the words hit him one by one. He didn't flinch. At first he just froze, like a man who'd walked into a storm and was still waiting for the rain to fall. Then his hand came up to his mouth, and the phone slipped from his fingers onto the table. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the cicadas outside, their rhythm steady against the silence between us. He took a slow breath, then another, but his chest still heaved as though the air had turned to glass. His voice broke before he could finish. All that time she laughed at me. She used you, I said softly. But that doesn't make you foolish. Rowan, it makes you human. He sank into the chair across from me, elbows on the table, his head in his hands. I kept defending her, he whispered, even when things didn't feel right. Even when you warned me. I thought I was just tired of you doubting people. I didn't want to believe that you saw what I didn't. I reached out, but stopped halfway. He looked so much like his father when he was lost in thought, jaw tense. eyes full of quiet grief. Finally, I rested my hand over his. I didn't want to be right, I said. He looked up then, tears cutting clean lines through the exhaustion on his face. You must hate me, he said. After everything I said to you? No, I whispered. You're my son. There's nothing you could say that would make me hate you. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling shakily. I thought she loved me because she said all the things I was afraid you wouldn't. That I was good enough. That I didn't need to prove anything. I wanted to believe her more than I wanted to see the truth. I squeezed his hand gently. Love that demands blindness isn't love. It's possession. He nodded slowly, his eyes unfocused, staring past me. Then, for the first time in days, he looked directly at me, not as a man defending his pride, but as the boy who used to ask if I'd still love him when he made mistakes. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't answer right away. Words felt too small for the moment. Instead, I rose and moved to his side, placing my hand against his shoulder. He leaned into it, and in that fragile quiet, I felt the years between us, every argument, every scar, every prayer fold into something wordless but whole. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely audible. What do we do now? I brushed a stray curl from his forehead. We breathe, I said. We start there, outside. The night deepened, the world slowing to its gentlest rhythm. Inside, my son's tears fell onto my hand, warm and real, washing away the last trace of the lie that had almost broken us. The days that followed blurred into something slow and colorless. The world, which had once hummed with rumor and noise, began to settle. The headlines faded, the gossip softened, and what had felt like a firestorm became nothing more than ash quiet, ordinary, almost merciful. But before the silence, there was the threat. 3 days after Rowan heard the recording, Jonas called early in the morning. His voice was steady, but edged with fatigue. She's making noise, he said. Soraya's filed an intention to sue for defamation. Empty, but loud. I felt no surprise. She's not done performing, I murmured. Jonas sighed. I've already spoken with her attorney. Once I sent the verified file and timestamps. The conversation changed. They know she's finished if this reaches court. She'll back down soon enough. Does Rowan know? Yes. He asked me not to tell you until it was settled. Jonas paused, his tone softening. He's not angry anymore, Eveline. He just sounds tired, like someone who's seen himself too clearly for the first time. That afternoon, the email came. One sentence, curt and final. Soraya Vale withdraws all claims. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a retreat wrapped in formality. I sat by the window with my tea, watching the sun scatter through the magnolia leaves, and felt neither triumph nor relief. Some victories are too hollow for celebration. I didn't want her punishment. I only wanted peace. The news cycle ended as quickly as it had begun. The tabloids moved on to brighter scandals. The city forgot. People returned to nodding politely at the market, pretending they hadn't once whispered in checkout lines. The silence that followed was almost foreign, like hearing your own breath after months of noise. One evening, I asked Jonas to drive me to the Vale residence. Rowan didn't know I went. I told myself it wasn't vengeance, only closure. Dorian Vale answered the door himself. He looked smaller somehow, his once proud posture weighed down by embarrassment and age. The house behind him, still elegant, carried an air of strain, flowers wilting in vases, the faint echo of a family too practiced in appearances. Mrs. Moreland, he said, straightening. I didn't expect I'm not here to speak about her. I interrupted gently. Only to say, I'm sorry it came to this. He hesitated, confusion crossing his face. You're sorry I nodded. We both lost something. Mr. Vale, you lost a daughter to her own ambition. I nearly lost my son to her charm. There's no victory here. Only lessons neither of us wanted to learn. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded, looking past me toward the garden. Soraya left yesterday. No note. No goodbye. She always thought control meant love. I suppose we both taught her that in different ways. The admission hung between us, raw and strangely human. I saw then not a rival father, not the polished man who once looked down on me at the rehearsal luncheon, but another parent tired, grieving, humbled by what love couldn't fix. I hope she finds peace, I said quietly. So do I, he murmured. And I hope your son forgives the world a little faster than mine ever could. We didn't shake hands. There was nothing left to formalize. When I stepped back outside, the air was cool, the sky deepening into the same violet hue it had worn on the night Rowan came back to me. I stood at the edge of the driveway, breathing in the stillness, and realized that the war was finally over. Not won, not lost, just finished. Jonas waited by the car, leaning against the door, the faintest trace of a smile in his eyes. Quiet day, he said. Yes, I replied, looking out toward the horizon. Finally quiet. And for the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel like absence. It felt like grace. Summer came late that year. The air in Savannah held the soft weight of salt and renewal, as if the city itself had decided to start over. By July, Rowan had moved back into the house only temporarily. He said, but I didn't ask for more. Sometimes, love means pretending you believe the word temporary even when you don't. He slept in his old room, the one still painted a shade of green he'd picked at 15. The first week, he barely spoke. He spent long hours walking along the riverfront, sometimes coming home with sand still clinging to his shoes. But one morning, I found a business card on the kitchen counter, Dr. Isaac Lorne, clinical therapist. Underneath, in Rowan's handwriting, was one word: Mondays. It wasn't a confession, it was a beginning. He started therapy quietly, without telling anyone but me. At first, he came home exhausted. The kind of tired that doesn't come from work, but from untangling what years of shame had knotted together. I'd hear him pacing at night, restless, whispering things to himself, apologies, maybe, or truths finally allowed to breathe. Sometimes, we painted in silence to fill the gaps. When I decided to sell the house, he didn't argue. It's too big for just us, I told him, running a hand along the banister his father had built decades ago. And it's full of echoes. He nodded. Where will you go? I found a cottage on the coast, near Tybee Island, small, sunny, close enough for the wind to keep me company. He smiled faintly. You always did trust the wind. We spent the following week sorting through a lifetime. Every drawer held small pieces of our history letters, receipts, photographs that had faded at the edges. I expected tears, but what came instead was laughter, the kind that bursts up like a forgotten melody. Remember this, Rowan said one afternoon, holding up a crooked ceramic mug he'd made in high school. It still leaks. I said, only a little. He grinned, like us. When moving day came, the house felt less like a loss and more like an exhale. We packed the essentials, left the ghosts behind, and drove east until the trees gave way to marshland and light. The cottage was everything the old house wasn't: bright, small, unassuming. The walls smelled faintly of cedar and salt. The windows opened wide to the sound of gulls and the hush of waves. We began repainting the furniture on the porch, soft cream for the chairs, pale blue for the shutters. Rowan handled the sanding, his arms steady, his movements deliberate. Every stroke of paint felt like a prayer neither of us needed to speak. At sunset, we'd sit outside, the sky melting into colors too tender to name. The sea breeze carried the scent of jasmine and the faint creak of the porch swing. One evening, he looked over at me, a smudge of paint still on his cheek. "You know," he said, "when I first came back, I thought I'd broken everything. But this?" He gestured to the tiny house, the half-dried chairs, the stillness. "It feels like we built something new from the wreck." I didn't answer right away. The light shifted across the porch, warm and forgiving. "You didn't break anything, Rowan," I said finally. "You just stopped pretending it wasn't already cracked." He smiled then. Not the tired one I'd seen for months, but something lighter, freer. When the last rays of sun touched the horizon, he stood and brushed off his hands. "What color next?" he asked. I looked at the small can of paint between us labeled Sunrise Gold. "That one," I said. "It suits us." And as he began to paint, the smell of salt and new beginnings filled the air, the kind that makes you believe that maybe, just maybe, some things are meant to be rebuilt, not to erase the past, but to let the light back in. The summer air carried the scent of salt and jasmine when Rowan moved back home. Or rather, back into what was left of home, half-empty rooms, walls still heavy with the echoes of arguments and the ghost of what almost was. He didn't bring much with him, just a duffel bag, a stack of sketchbooks, and a promise to himself that he would try again. He slept in his old room for the first week. The posters were gone, the furniture different, but the window was the same slant of morning light cutting across his desk, the same hum of cicadas from the oak outside. Sometimes I'd hear him stir late at night, pacing, whispering half-formed thoughts, as if rehearsing things he wished he'd said. One morning, over coffee, he looked up and said simply, "I've started therapy." It wasn't an announcement, just a quiet fact placed between us. "Good," I said, careful not to press. He nodded. "Body image, trust issues. The counselor says they're tied together. I always thought, if I could be smaller, quieter, more agreeable, maybe people would love me easier." He laughed softly then, the kind of laugh that hurt more than it soothed. Guess I found out where that got me. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Learning to take up space isn't arrogance, Rowan. It's survival." We didn't say more after that, but there was a new rhythm between us, gentle and deliberate. He began jogging in the mornings, cooking dinner on odd days, filling the silence with the sound of something human again. By September, I decided to sell the house. It was too big, too filled with memories that demanded tending. Every room carried a ghost of my husband, of Rowan's laughter as a boy, of nights I stayed awake waiting for answers I couldn't name. Jonas helped with the sale, discreet and kind as always. "You sure about this?" he asked when we signed the final papers. "Completely." I said, "This house was built for a version of us that doesn't exist anymore." The cottage I bought was small, nestled near the coast on Tybee Island. 2 bedrooms, white shutters, a porch facing the sea. It smelled faintly of pine and salt, and something new. When Rowan saw it for the first time, he stood on the porch for a long moment, listening to the waves. "It feels uncluttered," he said at last. "That's the idea," I smiled. "A place where nothing needs proving." Over the next few weeks, we repainted the furniture together, old oak chairs turned cream, the chipped coffee table a soft teal. Rowan played music as we worked slow jazz, folk tunes, songs from the years he thought I'd forgotten. Sometimes he'd hum along. Other times, he'd fall silent mid-brushstroke, lost in thought. We didn't talk about Soraya often. the few times her name surfaced. It was brief, like checking a scar that had already healed, but still ached when rain was coming. One afternoon, while we were sanding the window frames, he said, "You were right. You know, about her." I didn't look up. "That doesn't make me proud." "I know," he said, "but it makes me grateful." We worked quietly after that. The sound of the sea filling the pauses. The light shifted slowly through the windows. Spilling over the walls, we'd just painted a pale gold that made the room glow as if it had finally exhaled. When we finished, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying the space. "You think this is what healing looks like?" he asked, half smiling. "Maybe not yet," I said, looking around the brightened room, "but it's what it sounds like." That evening, we sat on the porch with mugs of tea, the tide whispering its steady rhythm. The sky burned orange, then softened to rose, then to quiet blue. Rowan's shoulders finally looked lighter, his laughter less careful, and as the first lanterns flickered on across the water, I realized the house wasn't the only thing we had rebuilt. We had learned to live in the light again softly, without apology, and finally, together. The mornings on Tybee Island had their own kind of rhythm, slow, golden, and mercifully quiet. The sea would come in whispering, and the wind through the dune grass would sound like old paper being turned gently by time itself. It was a peace I hadn't known I'd been chasing until I found it waiting here. I began teaching photography at the community center 3 mornings a week. It started small, 4 seniors with loaned cameras and plenty of stories to trade for every lesson. We didn't chase perfection. We hunted for light, texture, and moments that refused to pose. I told them, "Don't erase the shadows. That's where the soul hides." They laughed, but they understood. Their photos were full of crooked fences, wrinkled hands, chipped teacups. Imperfection as beauty, it became our quiet motto. There was something holy about seeing life as it truly was and still finding it worthy of capture. One of my students, a widower named Bernard, once told me, "You make us feel like nothing's too late to look beautiful again." I smiled at that. Maybe that's what healing really was, not forgetting the pain, but teaching it how to live in the light. Rowan was finding his own rhythm, too. He began volunteering at a local wellness group for men struggling with body image and confidence, something I hadn't even known existed before he told me. "They think they're coming to learn fitness," he said one afternoon, helping me hang a photo exhibit at the center. "But it's mostly about forgiving themselves." His voice carried an ease I hadn't heard in years. He'd traded bitterness for empathy, shame for understanding. Or sometimes I'd watch him speak to new members, calm and open, and I'd see the boy he once was, earnest, kind, still trying to fix the world. But now, without needing to prove his worth first, we had fallen into simple habits. Morning walks to the bakery, dinner on the porch, Sunday afternoons reading in separate chairs but the same silence. It wasn't the kind of love that needed constant words. It was the quiet, mended kind, the kind that had survived its own breaking. One Thursday, he came into the kitchen while I was whisking eggs for breakfast. "You know," he said, stealing a piece of toast from my plate. Most mothers would have stopped meddling after their first legal battle. Most sons, I replied, without looking up, would have stopped needing meddling by 33. He grinned, leaning against the counter. Touché. We ate together at the small kitchen table, sunlight spilling through the white curtains. The conversation meandered about my photography students, about his group, about whether we should repaint the porch again before hurricane season. Every now and then, he'd make some dry joke that sent us both into easy laughter. It struck me how different our laughter sounded now. Not the nervous kind people use to hide tension, but the kind that comes when the air finally feels safe to breathe. After breakfast, he showed me a small leather-bound notebook, his therapy journal, though he didn't call it that. Inside were short reflections, some barely a sentence long. One page read, "Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about learning the shape of your cracks." I ran my finger over the words, proud and quiet all at once. "You should publish these," I said. He shook his head. "Maybe someday. For now, they're just for me." Outside, gulls circled over the tide, their cries sharp but distant. I stepped to the window and watched them a moment, then turned back to him. "You know," I said softly, "you remind me of your father when you stand like that listening before speaking." He smiled faintly. "You always said he believed silence could heal things words ruined." And he was right, I said. The clock ticked between us, gentle and steady. Rowan gathered his bag, kissed my cheek, and headed out for his afternoon session. I stayed at the table a while longer, letting the sunlight move across the floorboards. In the corner, my camera sat waiting. I picked it up, framed the half-finished breakfast, the steam rising from his coffee cup, and clicked the shutter. The photo would never win an award, but it captured something better: peace, hard-earned and ordinary, and the kind of stillness that only comes after a storm that tried and failed to take everything. A year had passed since the house found its stillness. Morning came softly now, wrapped in a kind of quiet that didn't ask for anything in return. From my porch, I could see the horizon stretching pale and endless, the tide folding into itself like a lullaby. The chime above the doorway, a string of old teaspoons I'd tied together one afternoon, swayed in the sea wind, its silver notes brushing through the air like laughter from another lifetime. I had grown into this rhythm, the low hum of waves, the scent of salt, the slow patience of days measured by light instead of clocks. Every morning, I brewed tea and watched the sun paint its path across the porch floorboards, each golden line creeping farther into the house before fading again by noon. The walls, once bare, were now lined with photographs. My students from the community center had insisted on an exhibition there first. Some images were crooked, the focus imperfect, but that was the point. Imperfection had become a language we all spoke fluently. There was beauty in what refused to be flawless. On the small table beside my chair sat one frame. I never moved, a picture of Rowan standing near the shoreline, sleeves rolled up, wind pulling at his hair. His smile wasn't wide, it was easy, honest, unguarded. He'd taken it the morning before leaving for Charleston, where he'd been offered a position helping design outreach programs for young men's wellness. He still visited every other weekend, always bringing something small: a loaf of bread from a new bakery, a pebble from a beach he'd walked, once even an old camera with a scratched lens. "It reminded me of you," he'd said, a little dented, still working perfectly. I laughed then, but I kept that camera close. It sat by the window now, collecting sunlight instead of dust. I leaned back in my chair, wrapping my hands around the mug. The tea had cooled, but I didn't mind. I had learned that peace didn't always arrive warm. It sometimes settled quietly, like this. After all the storms had passed, the teaspoon chime rang again, catching a stronger gust of wind. I watched it spin lazily, glinting in the late morning sun, and I thought about all the doors those spoons had once opened in kitchens long gone. Every sound they made now was a reminder that even what's repurposed can still sing. I looked once more at Rowan's photograph, the edges softened by light. The boy who once doubted his worth had found his footing. The woman who once mistook silence for safety had learned to speak through steadiness instead. The breeze carried the faintest trace of sea lavender. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me, and spoke softly into the air words that felt both prayer and promise. Love raised me, Boundaries protected me. The chime answered with a single, clear note. The light shifted again, catching on the framed photo, turning his smile golden. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I had nothing left to guard, only a life to keep living, and a peace I'd finally earned.